Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Nick Davies and I'm a Programme Director here at the Institute for Government. On behalf of the IFG and the Productivity Institute, thank you very much for joining us for the fourth in our Productivity Pitches series, with today's focus being on local government. Productivity in public services has never been more important. Most services are struggling to return to pre-pandemic performance levels. With a difficult budget next week and an even harder spending review next year, money is likely to remain tight for the course of this Parliament. So improvements in performance are likely going to have to come from frontline workers finding new and innovative ways to deliver services. The aim of this event series is to highlight outstanding examples from the front line, identifying key improvements and lessons that can be applied more widely. And today we have three more fantastic case studies. So first up, we are going to have Gill Wilson and Tim Pearse from the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham on how they joined up previously disparate data sets across the local authority to better understand the needs of their residents and forecast demand for their services. They'll be followed by Vicky Schofield and Cheryl Whitehouse, who will explain how Wakefield Council cut costs and improved outcomes by running its own children's homes. Our third presentation will be from Councillor Bridget Smith from South Cambridgeshire Council, who will discuss the benefits of shifting to a 4-day working week. And each of those presentations is going to last 10 minutes. Those will be followed by 10 minutes of questions. And at the end, I will be joined by Professor Andy Westwood from the University of Manchester to discuss some of the common themes across the three presentations. If you have any questions for our panellists and you're in the room, please raise your hands when I ask. And if you're watching online, you can already submit questions using Slido. We will also be live tweeting from the IFG events account using the hashtag productivity pitches. Right, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Gill Wilson and Tim Pearse.
Thank you. Great. Morning, everyone. My name is Tim Pearse. I'm head of Insight and Innovation Support at LB Barking Dagenham. This is my colleague, Gill Wilson, who runs our Homes and Money Hub, which is a sort of debt and financial advice service for residents. So we've called this Harnessing the Power of Local Authority Data to Improve Productivity and Deliver Preventative Public Services. And we'll try and canter through this. There's a lot to say, but we'll try and keep it tight. I think if there's one thing that I would want people to take away from our presentation, it's this. So most public bodies have a quite specific remit, health, criminal justice, etc., and they have powers and data that relate to that remit. Local authorities are really different. We have a very broad range of data, debt, housing, social care, and a very broad range of legal duties to support our residents, including prevention. So there's a huge opportunity, if we're going to talk about prevention, to do it at local authority level. And we're going to talk about how we're doing that a bit in Barking Dagenham today. So what are the themes? The themes are prevention at scale. If we're serious about prevention, we have to get serious about our data. Because who are you going to target your resources at if you don't know your data well enough? 2, data is the new oil. Sorry, I know oil's not very sustainable, but I couldn't think of anything else, right? So data is the new oil. So what do? We're all, are we doing enough with it? Well, our pitch is like you need to connect the data together to make it meaningful and to understand your residents. Today, we're going to be talking about debt and financial assistance in particular, but the lessons of this go far broader, right? So again, a key point here is everyone's talking about AI, but AI is much more powerful if your data is good quality and well organized and well structured. So, how do we achieve that? Okay, so we're going to talk about OneView today. And basically, these are the data sets we bring into OneView. So adult social care, children's social care, housing, revenues and benefits, to develop a single view of the resident. So in most local authorities, you have adult social workers working with adults, using their data, that data, and adult social care legal duties to do so. What we're talking about is, in Barking Dagenham, we're looking after about 220,000 people. Why don't we bring some of this data together to help people more effectively? And we do that in 3 ways. So case summaries, that's for frontline officers who, when they're dealing with someone, can type in someone's name and find out a wider set of data about them. 2 dashboards which enable better sort of data-driven services, far better than legacy systems like Academy or Liquid Logic, for those of you who are au fait with those local government systems. And finally, proactive outreach, so working out who's going to be hitting acute services down the line and working with them before that happens. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Gill for case summaries and dashboards, and then I'll be back for proactive outreach.
Oh, that's it. So I'm on the front line. I manage a service on the front line, and I'm the person who's using the data. So Tim's from the Insight Hub, where he provides all the data, works with our OneView service to get it all through to us at our fingertips, and it is at our fingertips. Our case studies, we provide a single view of the resident and family to frontline officers when they're actually sitting in front of that family or resident. If we just look at how we use it with debt and money advice, it's so key that we know what their current rent arrears is, what is their rent account look like, what's their council tax, whether they're in social housing, whether they're in private housing. You'll be amazed how many people don't know. It's good to know what the education history is, because we sort of get an idea of the type of household. Is it a large family? Is there some chaos in there? Is it all a bit difficult? We're running around, you've got children with disabilities, you've got all of that in there. It tells us how we work with that family. And also, if there is social care and early help involvement, it does mean that we can work with them alongside so the household is getting an intervention for all of the issues, and it's easily done in that way. And it actually even gives us the name of the worker who's working, which is amazing. We've worked hard for that one, Tim, haven't we? So how we can work more effectively, I mean, we did start very early on in the money and debt space and housing, but it's gone from just maybe small teams involvement to wider teams, like all of our community hubs across the borough, our family navigators who have been working for about a year. They've got access. The revenues and benefits teams can see what's going on at the front line. Ourselves in the Homes and Money Hub, we can see what everyone else is doing, and temporary accommodation. It really does help to see what everyone else is doing, so you don't duplicate. We don't want to waste time. We don't want to be doing something that someone's already in the middle of. One of the really good innovations is embedding a benefits and income, a benefits calculator and income and expenditure tool. That's the basis of everything we do. And we want all of our staff across all of our community hubs to be able to access the information or do one for themselves. So then we can see it at the other end. So we don't have to be in Marksgate. We can do this from Barking. But it just means that we can get that information quickly to determine what the intervention looks like. We also have dashboards. Now this is amazing because it's very difficult to monitor outcomes when it's around, when you're working with a customer. We have to do it manually. We will be able to access this data really, really quickly, ongoing, daily. We can look at this data, see where it's going, what's happening, how can we make improvements constantly, because that's what we're striving for. So the case management system. So one of the things we found early on when we were doing this work is that the systems that we had for case management wasn't really fit for purpose, particularly for doing targeted work, because it became too admin intensive. We were cutting down on time wasting, but then we were having to do a lot of admin to make sure all the systems were updated. We couldn't go straight into OneView and just update it for everyone. So we decided to build a case management system. It is amazing, I have to say. We're working now directly into the system where we can have access to all the data. As soon as we type someone's name in, we've got the data there. We just add our case notes. We do an income and expenditure. It's on the file. It's there for anyone to see. Is this your one, Tim?
Okay, so final thing is proactive outreach. So we have a fabulous service in Gill's service. Gill and team work every day to put money in the pockets of people who are going to food banks to survive. It's a really remarkable service. Barking Dagenham also has a high rate of churn. We have lots of people coming in, lots of people from abroad making their first home in Barking. They don't necessarily know we have a debt and money service that's free and will help you. And so our idea was, we can see when people are getting into financial difficulty because they stop paying their council tax or their social rent. So shall we try and get in touch with them before we have to send them to court? So we've done a few pilots. I'm going to talk about 2 today. One of them was just coming out of COVID. Lots of people were in arrears and didn't know much about the system. And we thought, I bet you lots of those probably could afford a payment plan. So why don't we give them a call instead of taking them to court and see if they could, they prefer to do a payment plan. And so what we found was the blue, yep. 1 minute. Okay, so what we found was far more people that we called paid off or made a payment, including 2 months after. So that's after court as well. So the call was more effective even than court. We did another one of more vulnerable people and delivered a whole range of support. This was about supporting people, but as you can see, when you support people, a lot of that is about putting money in their pockets, and then that flows back to the council as well in form of arrears. So it's win-win. So lots of money generated for the council, even more for residents. We're building this into kind of business as usual. Basically, it's very, very difficult to put a total sum on benefits for this. I've put some up here. So we've raised over £1 million for residents. 300k of that's gone back to the council. There's sort of hundreds of hours saved and lots more use cases that we could deliver. That's just in the money and debt space. There's far broader benefits like the automation of our Supporting Families programme. But yeah, we can talk more about that during questions. So final slide, if that's okay. So there's loads more use cases for this, right? So pension credit support, we're just about to reach out to people who probably aren't getting enough. 2, homelessness prevention. 3, falls. We think we can do all of that. What could central government do to help? So specific legislation like the Digital Economies Act 2017, really, really helpful for data sharing. 2, take an enabling approach. We've had lots of fun and games with DWP and HMRC about sharing data, which is actually quite straightforward and held locally anyway. 3, advocate good use cases. And 4, money. Can't stress enough money, because anyone who's not a social worker or a refuse collector is fighting every year to kind of have a job. That's it.
Thank you. I'm going to... I just want to pick up quickly on data sharing, because we often hear that as a barrier to more effective local working. What were the kind of data sharing barriers, and what could central government do to make it easier for you to share data internally, but also with other local agencies?
Should I start on that? Yeah. So the biggest barrier is culture and fear. So people are very scared about matching data. But actually, if you can set out, right, we've got a money and debt service, and what we'd like to do is use this specific bit of data to reach out to people to help them with their debt, right? If you can lay it out like that, people start to get it. And actually, there's a lot of legislation in place already that supports with that. Additional stuff that will be helpful is, as I say, specific data sharing legislation like the Digital Economies Act has been really helpful. But also, if central government can kind of help a little bit with when, sharing data, even if it's locally held already, that would be great. Gill, would you have anything to add to that?
I think it's just beneficial for the people that we're working with. And I think any barriers that stop you doing that need to really be considered, because to overcome some of the issues, and we've had some marvellous outcomes from some of the targeted work we've done. If we hadn't have done that, there is no way that person would have walked through our door. So we do need to make it clear that this isn't the benefit for the council or anybody else, it's for the resident, and to get them back on their feet and to enable us to support them while they're doing that.
Thank you. I'm going to open up to questions from the audience. If you could say your name, where you're from, and ensure it is in fact a question and not a long statement, that would be great. Okay, I'm going to come to the gentleman here and then the gentleman at the back.
Thanks very much. Paul Atherton. Today I'm going to be under my hat of the Creative Associate at the Museum of Homelessness. I'm one of, obviously, the major causes of homelessness in Britain today is DWP suspensions, DWP cuts, DWP legislation. And I was just wondering, had you discovered a way of sidestepping their legislation in order to reinstate benefits, make sure people are paid properly, and the ilk to prevent homelessness in the sector that you're working in?
Thank you. And we'll just take the other question at the back first.
Hi, Philip Nye from Institute for Government. Really fascinating talk. Thank you very much for that. I guess I'm interested, to what extent do the networks exist between local authorities? Did you have to do this in isolation, or are there other local authorities tackling similar things that you can collaborate with, share your learnings with them, etc.? Thanks.
Great. So question on navigating DWP and kind of networks across local government.
Should I just start on DWP and I'll hand over to you for the... So I'm not on the front line, so I don't know about sidestepping that sort of stuff. But what I would say is a lot of the benefits regs are very clunky. And actually what we're trying to do here is get out to people, see what they need, and see if we can help them. And often we can. So I think that's helpful, but it doesn't sidestep the underlying issues that you've flagged. I don't know, Gill, if you'd have anything to...
Yeah, I think you can't sidestep. You've got to work with it. And I think that the key is for us is to work with DWP, JCP on a local level to ensure we get the best outcomes. And they are on the same page. They don't want people to be in a safeguarding position where they can't, or destitute. So if we work together, we work really, really closely. I actually work alongside, we're all in the same office, so it helps. One of the things in Barking and Dagenham is that we've always had a really close relationship with DWP. So unfortunately, the regulations are there, but what we can do is work with DWP to find ways to enable that resident to progress. And they are open to that, but we still have to follow those regulations and know them as well. It's important that we know. Yeah.
And then the other question with local authority networks.
So my sense is they're quite good for generic things. Like if you want to talk about how to put your stuff on the cloud, you can find some people to talk about that. But we haven't, it's not been so easy to find the people that are doing this. You sort of bump into them, you're like, oh wow, that's something. So I do think there's more that local government could be doing to share stuff like this, to connect people, like sort of effective communities of practice. It's just, the problem is it's such a broad sector and everyone does things slightly differently. So people think I'm a digital person. I mean, I wouldn't call myself a digital person. I call myself a data person. So it's hard to find. It's such a broad thing that it's hard to connect. So I don't think we've got that right, really, and it's probably something we should think about. Jill, I don't know if you...
We do get lots of other local authorities requesting a visit or a discussion about what we're doing, and we are always open to share. And it's absolutely our pleasure to share what we've done, because it can just cut down on some of the work that we've put into it for the last 2 years or so. If we can cut out some of that for other people, for instance, you go in and think, all I want is access to all the data, and when you get access to all the data, you think, well, actually, I don't need that much, and working with it on a daily basis, I don't need to go through reams and reams. You actually only need 12 months, really. You need the name of the person who else is working on there, but you want the relevant information, and it takes time to get it all down. So if I can share that with other local authorities, then I absolutely will.
We've had a couple of questions online about kind of the resourcing required to set this up. Like, how much did it cost, and the amount of kind of staff time and effort that went into it as well?
So I'll take it from the data perspective, and maybe you can take about it from the home debt and money side. So I should say we work with an external contractor on this called Cllr. So there's definite upfront costs of contracting costs. They hold the platform and stuff like that. So There is some money there. And then there's kind of, on my side, on the Insight Hub side, there is like quite a bit of data scientist time, there's quite a bit of information governance time, there's quite a bit of stakeholder management time. But I'd say we're doing it on a shoestring, right? This looks less well-resourced than a lot of transformation programs in local government. So it's not prohibitive. The critical thing is, have you got the leadership that will stick with it? Because it takes time to build this and to see the use cases. So that's the critical thing, I'd say. What about the Homes and Money Hub, Gill?
I think with us, it has taken time. We've been there right from the start, right from the design, and it is daunting, and you're managing all your other priorities, and it's like, oh, they want us another hour and a half, and you think, this is a little bit, but we stuck with it. Yeah. We all bought into it. That was the key thing. We all bought into it. We all wanted the outcome, and we knew that we had to put the time and effort in to get the outcome that we wanted. And I am pleased now, because when I look at my brand new shiny case management system, I think, but we were all part of that, and not only myself, officers, other managers, we were all part of it. So we've built that ourselves. So there is pride there. So you think, yeah, actually, I want to spend that time. But it was daunting at the beginning, I have to say.
And I've got one more question about the data. So from Elise Marshall was asked, how do you account for the time lag in data sets? Do you apply a mixed method approach to analysing and interpreting the data with more immediate information gathered through community engagement methods?
So there's definite time lags in data, because basically what we need to do is we need to take cuts from all those 5 systems and send them over an information governance bridge, which does all sorts of fancy things around pseudonymization. And every time you do that, it takes time. We haven't got to automation of that yet. So we're like the most regular data feeds we're doing are 1 week. So at their worst, they're 6 days out of date. Now, for pretty much anything we're doing, that's okay. There are some risks with that like exact amounts of debt are slightly out, but broadly then that comes down to like how do you work with staff to train them that they know that this could be like 10% out, but it'll refresh on Tuesday or whatever. So that it's not like sensor technology where you have to be on it minute to minute. It just defines the use cases, of which there are plenty. Again, Jill, I don't know if have you noticed are there difficulties with out of date?
Sometimes we do, to be honest. When you've got a customer sitting in front of you and they say, well, no, I paid £300 last week and you're telling me it's this. So there is that, but we are aware of it. And it doesn't take us very much if we need to, because we've got a nice little handy reference on our case summary that tells us which system to look at and what is the reference, so it can be quick. So we bear that in mind. I think most of our officers are used to that now, and I think the only comment they will say is, what's the time lag on that one? Oh yeah, it's a week. That's understandable, then that makes sense. And we're used to it. We're used to working with that difference.
Perfect. Well, on that note, we're going to bring that to an end and ask up our next speakers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So next up, we have Vicky Schofield and Cheryl Whitehouse from Wakefield Council, and I'll hand over to you.
So technology and me don't go together, colleagues, so let's see if I can make this go. So we are, yes, there you go, that's my challenging bit over and done. So we're here to speak to you this afternoon about children, and in particular children in care. And I guess if you've been paying attention to the news recently, you will be aware that the care costs for children across the country are one of the most significant features driving local authority budgets in terms of huge challenge. You will know that children's care costs can be anywhere upwards of £500,000 a year for an individual child, sometimes over £1 million. And when you understand the nature of the work with children in care, you understand that that's not always foreseeable. So in that context, this is one of the biggest and most difficult to manage costs that councils face. There is also a significant issue around the impact for children of the current care system. And Josh McAllister, who published his report now a couple of years ago, referred to that. That quote sets some of this out. But in a nutshell, too few placements for too many children who have needs which the current system does not accommodate very well. So this is what we're going to try and talk about today. Just a little focus on the money before we move on. This is some scoping across our region, but just to underline the point around the cost, this is last year, but 58 million of overspend in children's care placements. So in Wakefield, what we have done is tried to work on this issue over a period of years, and we took the position where we were seeking problems and trying to solve them. And on the basis that we understood the problems, what we wanted to do is create a more bespoke approach to children. There can be a view that economies of scale work, that if we run bigger homes and provide more and more placements, that's the thing that works. We've actually done completely the opposite in Wakefield and moved to a much smaller footprint, with children living in very small, bespoke accommodations, and the impact and outcome of that we will show you. We've done three things. So we've changed our 16 plus estate. We own and manage a significant number of our own placements. We use council office buildings. We've converted those. We work with private landlords locally around spare capacity in the private market. We use any accommodation that we can find and we convert it for children who are 16 plus, and then we support them through a bespoke model that we've created locally. We've completely transformed our residential estate, moving away from large children's homes to smaller two-bedded children's homes in usual houses on usual streets. And we've also, with our health providers, created a bespoke provision for children who would otherwise find themselves in Tier 4 mental health placements or secure accommodation. And the three things are driving real shift for Wakefield children and for the budgets. So this is the timeline, that's the journey that we went on. This is there really to show you guys that these homes look like any other home, anywhere, on any street. The neighbours on these streets, unless we told them that we were there, which we do, by the way, wouldn't know we were. And our children are absolutely a part of the community. What we took the decision to do is, rather than just creating more homes, we decommissioned our larger homes, which is quite unusual. So we don't run any more placements than we used to. We've just repurposed our placements for the most complex children so that we meet their needs locally. And I'm going to hand over to Cheryl to tell you about the model and show you the impact that one might say.
Hi, everybody. So, as Vicky's just said, we had large children's homes. So for you guys, in terms of children's homes, you probably think of a large institutional building where children are looked after. We decommissioned ours, and as Vicky said, we created smaller homes in communities. And what we wanted was these smaller homes with a smaller staff team, so children could develop those safe, secure and trusting relationships with the staff around them, which would develop as a result of the continuity of care from that staff team. And that meant that we would have enhanced outcomes for children in our homes. So no placement disruptions, improved emotional and behavioural presentation, better educational progress. So as just touched on, the Croft is our specialist home. It's the first in the country. The Croft is a provision which sits in between secure provision, so children who are subject to secure accommodation, and also tier 4 mental health beds, so for children who require that mental health intervention. This home looks after our children with the more risky and complex presentations. So we're talking significant self-harm as an example. And we offer a trauma-informed recovery plan to focus on our children in terms of improving outcomes for them. Okay. Our 16 plus model, so we've got a very large estate in terms of our 16 plus accommodation, and they range from having emergency beds for our young people when we find that young people need to somewhere to sleep there and then on that evening, whilst we plan for more appropriate provision around them. And we offer a range of support options which is responsive to individual need. And what we do to understand individual needs is complete a skills assessment. So that skills assessment will tell us us, are they ready for a semi-independent living? And if so, what is it they need further to enhance them being ready for transition into their own 18 plus accommodation in the adult world, such as social housing. And it's a very low cost impact model. The outcomes for our young people in this provision is really, really strong. And we use this provision to offer trainer flats for our children in care who are in residential care, who want to be able to step down into their own semi-independent provision, and we can continue to care for them whilst wrapping around them that bespoke level of assessment, care and support. And here is just some of the ways we measure the impact for our children in care. So at the top left, as you look at it, you can see as a result of this model, we've significantly reduced our number of children in care placed out of authority. So they're in the authority where they live, where they belong, where the family network is, and where their other resources are available to them. In top right, we've got our care leavers NEAT, so that's for young people not in education, employment or training. And as you can see, Wakefield, which is the blue banner, is performing really strongly compared to our statistical neighbours and the England average. Bottom right, again, just external residential placements. That just shows how we've reduced our use of the external market as a result of this modelling we've done. And the bottom left is 3+ moves. So you'll see a reduction in that as children are looked after by us and there are no placement disruptions, which means they don't move on. We care for them regardless of their presentation, and we make sure we have the right support in place for them. So here's just some of the outcomes of our 16+ accommodation. So 93% placement stability in the year. We've been really successful in terms of our young people aged 18 plus securing their own social tenancies, and that was 55 young people between December 22 and 23, and we've had no placement, we've had no breakdowns or loss of tenancies as a result of our relationship with our housing provider and the outreach support we offer alongside our housing provider. And in March 23, we had a focus visit from Ofsted, and they confirmed there was a large range of accommodation that was actually meeting the needs of our young care leavers. A bit quicker, sorry. I like to talk, I'm really sorry. Okay, so this is just this is just a process map. This sets out, it talks about one young person, their starting point in the journey when they moved to live with us and where they ended up in March 24. And you could, starting point, 8 placement moves due to carers struggling to understand and meet needs. And what we had was that young person at the age of 18 moving into his own semi-supported accommodation. And we measure the progress of our children's emotional well-being through something we call Strength and Difficulties questionnaire, and that the bottom left just reflects low being very good, high, emotionally dysregulated and need some support. So you can see through our provision we've been able to provide some better outcomes for them. Again, this is just another bit of a mapping, just reflecting some a young person that we had with us in terms of, again, history of physical violence and neglect. SDQ scores improved. So I'm not going to go through that because it's very similar to the other, and I'm conscious I'm running out of time. This is what some of our children say. The only placements fully support me. I've had access to the right services. They've helped me to understand. I feel listened to. I've got a network of support. All the things we want to hear from our young people to know that we're getting it right and caring for our children and young people. And then I'm going to hand over to Vicky. Sorry.
And this is just another revisit of the financial comparison, I guess. So on that, I can't do left and right either. I think that's right. The Wakefield cost for the 16+ accommodation is compared to the private provider cost for 16+ accommodation. So you can see there, really low cost, very high outcome. We're absolutely confident that what we're doing is driving better outcome at lower cost. Similarly, the cost for children's homes, this is what we pay a private provider on average in Wakefield, but we know, again, the regional comparison is higher than that. So we can see really good outcome, really low cost. And then just because this is important, this is not what we do it for, but this is really important, these homes are good and outstanding. So identified by the regulator as compliant with the regulation and going above and beyond in some significant number of cases. And the inspection reports are there, should anybody be interested.
Fabulous, thank you. Again, I'd just like to start with one question, which was, what was the upfront cost of kind of buying or converting some of the kind of the homes that you're now using?
Okay. So Wakefield Council have invested probably just over £1 million, I would say, in capital in this scheme. What we are really confident about, though, is that that's driving economies in the revenue budget. So this more than pays for itself, I guess, is what we would say. I think also because we've been quite creative, shall I say, in our use of the council's own accommodation, particularly for the 16-plus estate, we've been able to minimise the capital cost too.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up again to questions from the audience. And again, if you could say your name, where you're from, and make sure it is a question. So we'll go to the lady here.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Grace Duffy. I'm from Bridget's Outcomes Partnership. So we work with lots of councils to create kind of different services, including lots of preventative ones. And certainly we know from some of our partners that have really struggled to make that investment into preventative services because of the cost of the private provision. So kind of building on Nick's question, I'm just wondering how you managed to make that case internally, and if that was like double running, or were you able to sort of demonstrate the likely offset? Because we know lots of local governments with annualised budgets actually kind of struggle technically to be able to demonstrate that financial case.
And just to add to that, because someone was asked a very similar question online, which is, does the shift to smaller scale residential provision impact the unit cost? And if so, how did you sell this internally?
Okay. So the unit cost for us is pretty similar to the unit cost in a larger home. So to answer that question first. So we didn't see a significant increase in the unit cost, and the reason for that is because the model is very much about de-escalation. So our rotas are actually smaller than they would probably have previously been for similar children with similar presentations. To give you an example, we don't have a waking night staff member in our two-bedded homes. In a bigger home, you would employ sometimes 2, maybe more staff who sit around the home all night long and stay awake. In our homes, because we're absolutely clear these are as close to family homes as possible, we set out on the basis that we were not going to do that, notwithstanding that these are complex children. So we put the home to bed, as you would put your own family homes to bed, and that's absolutely worked. So it saves cost, it drives routine, and it creates normality and a sense of a family home for children. So the net unit costs are absolutely similar. If you have more questions, we can give you the examples around how that works. In terms of the upfront investment, I think the thing that really works for us is about knowing the children and understanding where the costs will arise if we don't do things differently. So again, I think we often think that strategic work and change is about understanding the big picture, the macro position. For us, this was all about the micro position. It was about looking at those children who were not doing well, who were moving in placements, whose costs to the organisation were increasing very regularly. And what we were able to do is see what happened to them also as they moved into adulthood and for health services. And because we understood that in detail, we've been able to create some trust in the local partnership with education, with health and within the council, that changing things and doing it differently was actually going to be a cost saver rather than a cost generator. So we would say knowing the children well and understanding and plotting cost is the thing that will get you there.
And ours, just quickly to add on to that, our Croft home is 50-50 funded with health. So health are really committed. They can see the benefits of this model as well, because it stops escalation of need and cost for them as well as the young people. And
it is worth saying every child that's moved through that model has been successfully de-escalated. So children who've come from the secure estate, who would otherwise have gone into a Tier 4, an adult mental health bed, have been successfully de-escalated and now live in semi-supported, relatively usual accommodation. So the outcomes are very good and the cost is lower.
Can you say a bit more about how that partnership with health came about? Because we often hear that it can be challenging for local authorities.
We always get the question.
We always get asked this question. Do you want to or do you want me to?
I mean, we can both input there, but I think some of it was about initially understanding the problem, working together to understand the problem, rather than it being an us and them. You know, no, it's your problem, no, it's our problem. So we very much came at it as there's a problem, we need to solve it. So let's look at these cases. Let's use some case examples to be able to plan what we need to do differently, because, you know, this to-ing and fro-ing is not really helping the young people, the children and young people. And for us, it's all about the outcomes for children and young people.
Did you have a good relationship with them before? Has there been kind of, for example, relative stability in terms of the key players?
Absolutely not. Somebody's laughing a lot, and maybe you know Wakefield a number of years ago, but where we began was as an inadequate local authority, actually, based on the Ofsted judgment back in 2018, and the initial conversations about this work began the year after. And those initial conversations were rooted very much in early conflicts, really, around children's cases where we couldn't agree, we couldn't solve the problem. We knew we weren't getting it right, but we were frustrated with each other's parts of the system because we weren't helping each other to do the right thing. What we did is what I said earlier. We tried to acknowledge the conflict, but park it up and understand the circumstances for the children, and importantly, where the costs land up in the system. So what we could see for the children's cases that we were looking at is that in almost every case where we had been in these challenging situations around children with no placement, no resolution, very high cost circumstances, but very high risk, those children invariably ended up in the adult mental health system and then couldn't be discharged from it. So on that basis, our health providers, working through a series of questions about better if, what if we tried something different, were prepared to work with us in the local authority and design something new. We designed it together, we recruited together, we built the home together. We have run it together. We still revisit the model together when there is learning to do. But it's, for us, I think, again, about understanding the children, their experience, what we do that doesn't work, where the costs land, and then what we can do as an alternative.
Thank you. I think on that note, we will give a round of applause and say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. And our third presentation is from Councillor Bridget Smith, and I'll hand that over to you.
Thank you very much. That was so interesting. Thank you. Righty-ho. So, 4-day working week. So, sorry, let me just sort my bits out. Which bit of my... Sorry, I'm just working out which bit to... Oh, that's not gone well. Is it the... That's... Okay, fine. I got you. Righty-ho. So there's a crisis in recruitment and retention throughout the public sector. It's particularly acute in places like South Cambridgeshire, where it's really expensive to live, and there's a really vibrant private sector competing for exactly the sort of staff that we need in South Cambridgeshire. You know, it particularly hits us on planners and HGV drivers who are responsible for collecting all our bin waste. So we had tried everything we could. Golden hellos, 9-day weeks, flexible working and so on, and nothing was having the effect we needed. And this, we were spending, before the trial, and this is the longest trial that's been run in the UK in private or public sector on a 4-day working week model. Prior to that, we were spending £2 million a year on agency staff, and good as they are, they don't deliver the same sort of service that your own permanent staff do, and customers don't like it because they don't get the continuity. On top of which, we were really struggling to improve our productivity, and we were finding it nigh on impossible to deliver very ambitious transformation programs. So the pandemic, prior to the pandemic, we were already moving into hybrid working, so we had all the technology there. We know that people have changed their work-life balance. I have 3 sons, aged 20s and the 30s. They're just not prepared to work the way my husband and I have worked. They want a work-life balance. say the workplace is much more complex now, and we are competing on a very uneven playing field in South Cambridgeshire with the private sector. We just hemorrhage planners who we train up into the private sector. So a 4-day working week model is 100% of the work in 80% of the time for 100% of the pay. And we had a very good look at the private sector trials that had been run, and in those they were seeing over 90% of people, once they'd completed their trial, then continue to be permanent 4-day week employers. So we knew it worked in the private sector. So why couldn't it work in the public sector? So we did some baseline data at the point at which nobody within the organisation, apart from myself and my chief executive, knew we were thinking about this. So we had some very extensive health and well-being data before anybody got wind of where we were going. We then spent a 3-month period planning it, because when we looked at the private sector on when it didn't work, it was because they hadn't invested properly in the planning. And the planning involved not myself and my chief executive saying to our 650 staff, this is how you do it, here's the manual, because there wasn't a manual. It was us saying to them, look, there's an opportunity here. How can you work smarter? How can you be more efficient? How can you work more intensely? And for doing that, your reward is an extra 52 days off a year. And that's quite a reward. We're requiring people to work at a level of intensity that is not sustainable over 5 days a week. So we already have some of the longest working hours in Europe and some of the lowest productivity. So, a bit of a no-brainer there. So to simplify things, people either take a Monday or Friday off, our offices are open 5 days a week, and we still deliver our 24/7 emergency service. There's always a member of staff, as a touch point within every single service area. So we embark after the 3-month trial. The reason for running a 3-month trial was to see whether productivity held up. And we measured, I think it was 24 KPIs, and it did hold up. If it hadn't, after that 3-month initial trial, we would have either gone back to the drawing board or ditched it, but it did. We then embarked on a 1-year trial, and we did it initially just with the desk-based people, and then in September last year we moved it on to waste, which we thought was going to be more challenging because you had to rearrange all the bin collections to do it over four days, but actually it went really, really smoothly. So these are the what we measured on the sort of health and well-being data. And we had masses and masses of data. So I won't go through, I know you can't read this, but the blue represents the baseline data before anybody knew we were going to do it. The sort of beige-coloured one was after the 3-month initial trial, and then what really fills me with joy is we've seen continuous improvement over the 12 months. So this was the baseline data, 3.9 out of 5 good days at work over, before anybody knew what was happening. Intention to leave, -3. So this was the first point at which we touched base, 4.4%, intention to leave +9. And we saw continuous improvement after 12 months. So going back to the beginning, this was about recruitment and retention. So staff turnover reduced by 39%. When we advertise jobs, we now get over 50% more applicants, and those applicants are of a far higher calibre than we were getting before, because we are now considered to be, the council to work at. It's really sort of set us apart. Over the 12-month trial, we recruited 134 people, and over 3/4 of them said the fact that as we were running this trial influenced their decision to apply for us and to accept a job with us. Remember, it's just a trial, so there's never been any guarantee that we would become a 4-day week employer. So people were taking a risk. Because if things hadn't gone right, if our data didn't stack up, then we would have just gone back to what we had before. Employee commitment improved significantly, and that's because people are getting a reward, and it's a gift, this day off, and they know that it's a gift that can be taken away at any time if our performance doesn't hold up. So I've already said we stay open all the time. Our customer contact centre, we actually increased the hours of opening. So 24 key performance indicators over the 12-month, 11 actually improved. You can see some examples on the right-hand side, 11 maintained, 2 went down, but actually this was housing rent collection, which I kind of put down to the cost of living crisis, and the average days to relet housing stock. Actually, I should say we're still in the top quartile for housing rent collection, and reletting housing stock, we're way in advance of the government's target there anyway. We're just getting houses back in a much, much poorer state these days, which I think is to do with other social factors. Bit of evidence there about which things really improved. You'll notice planning, lots of stuff improved on planning, and we were struggling, and this has turbocharged our transformation programme within planning. And I now have planners. Didn't have planners before, I now have brilliant planners. I think our can I say we're fully staffed? We're as fully staffed as anyone could wish to be. And there was a cost saving to it. So after costs, and we had to add in an extra 2 waste round collections, we saved over £250,000, mainly due to reduced agency costs and recruitment costs, because it's jolly expensive to be advertising for new staff all the time. So there was a cost saving there. That was a gallop. Am I within the 10 minutes? Marvellous, okay. Okay, more time for questions.
So I often ask speakers, were there any barriers that you faced from central government? But in your instance, I know the Minister directly tried to stop you doing this. I wonder if you could say a bit more about how much autonomy local authorities actually have in law to do the type of thing you've done, and kind of what you learned from the grapple with the government over this.
Thank you. So I won't go into the detail of the problems we had with the last government, other than to say that if they could have stopped us, they would have stopped us. So they issued us with 2 best value notices. The second one expires in 3 weeks' time. We are still submitting 200 pieces of raw data every Monday night to government. And I imagine there's a cost to them to analyse all this data. But if it had shown anything, we would certainly know about it. It wasn't just the local government minister, it was the Prime Minister who told me to stop it. However, we've moved on, and we have a new government now who are certainly making all the right noises about the autonomy that those of us in local government should have. We are employers. We're employers in our own right, and I think it's up to all of us to set the employment criteria that suits us best. And just because this worked in South Cambridgeshire doesn't mean it will work in Wakefield. It doesn't mean it'll work anywhere else. But because of the extra challenges we have, it has worked for us. And if anybody wants to interrogate the data, everything is on our website. Big reports. All our results were independently assessed after the initial trial by the Bennett Institute, and then the last lot has been independently assessed by Cambridge and Salford University. So we haven't marked our own homework. So I've actually got a meeting with the local government minister on Wednesday at the local government conference this week. He's saying all the right things about local government should be able to decide what's best for local government without central government interference.
Thank you. I will open it up to questions. I'll go there first, and then I'll go here.
Thank you very much for your speech. I'm an alumni of Essex University. I'm Navanita Chakravarti. So my question is, I'm very much curious to know that in this trial period, the employer was aware that they were in trial period.
Sorry, could you say that again?
The employer was aware that they were in trial period. They are known about that they are in trial period, or
to what extent did the employees know they were in a trial period?
Oh, right. Oh, absolutely. So they absolutely understood what was going on. So we had the baseline health and well-being data independently assessed. We do that anyway, but we made sure we had the current year's study done. And then I had to tell my cabinet that the chief exec and I had this marvellous idea, but we hadn't told them about it. That was slightly tricky. Then I obviously had to tell my own political group, and we're a large political group at South Cambridgeshire. So I had to land planned it with them. I won't say they all thought it was a brilliant idea, but they were up for a challenge. And then obviously we introduced it at exactly the same time to the staff. So it was difficult for them. And when we did a bit of sort of heat testing a few weeks in, the majority of the staff were getting on all right with it. We did find that about 26% were really struggling. And when we looked at why that was, the majority of them, it was because we just hadn't done enough preparation with them and we needed to do more work with them. Another group, I think we have 6 people who still work a 5-day week because they just want to work a 5-day week. So nobody's forced to do it, all right? So, whatever their lifestyle is, they want to work 5 days, absolutely fine. And then there was another small group of people whose jobs were just too big. And they were too big when they were doing a 5-day week. So of course they're too big for a 4-day week. So we had to do some job evaluation work with them to make sure that they had, their jobs were right. It's like good people, you just give them more work to do. And I think that's what had happened to them. So now we only have 6 out of 650 who still work a 5-day week. And everyone else seems happy. But they won't tell you it's easy. That level of intensity is hard.
Thank you. And then question down the front here.
Tim Pearse.
Wait, the microphone. Thank you.
Tim Pearse, Barking Dagenham. Thanks, really interesting talk. Do you feel that people have to work really differently? And to what extent do you kind of help people think about how they work differently?
So people do have to work very differently. You cannot work you can't get 100% of your work done in 80% of the time if you're working the same way you worked before. So we very much went with all the teams to find their own solutions. So there's no kind of general answer to what works, but if I just give you certain examples, we work hybridly. Teams get to choose where is the best place to do the work. So they have a lot of autonomy in deciding it themselves. But just as far as the organisation as a whole is concerned, I used to sit in meetings with 20 colleagues in there just in case I needed them for a couple of minutes. We don't do that anymore. All our meetings are on Teams. Officers get called in when they're needed, and then they go off and they get on with their jobs. Our meetings are timed. We stick, religiously to the timing of meetings because you know what councillors are like. They love to talk and go on far too long. We simply don't do that anymore. People. We used to be very greedy of our officers' time, and actually sometimes officers are very greedy of the leadership's time. And we're now very respectful of everybody's time because we want everyone to be able to do their work in the time frame. But they're not checking their Facebook or writing their shopping list when they're at work. And you all know that in most organisations, come Friday, everybody's on a bit of a, they're not working as efficiently, they're beginning to think about the weekend, so they're less productive on a Friday. And I think some studies have shown that they're about 20%, 20% of the time on a Friday is productive. We require people to be 100% productive 4 days a week. And that's why they need the 3 days off in order to recover and sort of restore their energy. And when people say to me, well, they should work like that 5 days a week, it's not possible.
I've had a couple of questions online about the impact on the professional development of more junior staff. So one person, Charles James South, has asked, a Harvard study found hybrid working productivity gains were achieved by mortgaging junior workers' development. Productivity increases were found in seniors. Could a 4-day week intensify that effect? And similarly, someone else asked, with 20% less opportunity to learn from senior staff, might that impact on more junior staff development?
So really good questions, and this was something that we picked up, early on in the trial. So we now expect all teams to get together in person at least once a week. So so that happens. We're actually seeing a greater uptake of training and so on because actually people are better rested. They're better rested and they're more motivated. And I think that's why this has turbocharged the transformation work because it needs motivated people to do more than their kind of core responsibility. But we've actually seen an improvement. We didn't start off saying everybody had to be in the office at least once a week, but we've particularly when we've got the feedback from the younger members of staff or the less experienced members of staff, needing to be able to touch base with their managers on a regular opportunity. That's what so we want a sort of constant improvement. And it's not to say that, I don't think we've got it perfect. I think we will continue to improve. I mean, obviously, we haven't yet got to the point of where we take a decision to our full council meeting about becoming a 4-day week employer, because we need to know that this government is not going to lever financial penalties on local authorities that run a 4-day week working model. So we need our best value notice to expire. I need confirmation from government that there are no financial penalties. Then I can run a consultation on it, and then we can hopefully get past the final hurdle.
I had a question here from Bernard, who says he's a retired council chief executive. Have you found it necessary to withdraw the scheme from any individuals who've sought to game the new system? Or do you have mechanisms in place were that to become an issue?
So look, it's no different to a manager of a team having somebody who's gone a bit off the boil. That's just business as usual. So managers within teams have to make sure that all their staff have the tools in order to deliver their work in that time period. And you've got to get where the last government struggled was they couldn't get their heads around the idea that we pay people to do a job. We don't pay people to be a bottom on a seat for X number of hours a day. You're paid to do a job, and if you can do the job more efficiently in a shorter period of time and actually demonstrate the sort of increases in productivity and health and well-being that we demonstrated, it seems like a bit of a win-win.
One final question. How much of the impact do you think comes from the novelty? Or more positively, how would you keep this being motivational in a world where this was the norm?
Right. So the fact that we have continued to see improvement over the 12 months trial, I think shows that there isn't a novelty element there. However, everyone is aware this is a trial. And they will obviously want us to get over that final hurdle in order to, adopt it formally. It's been difficult taking the decision to be a 4-day week employer, albeit in a trial, but actually if things start to go wrong and people get complacent and so on, then there's nothing to stop us going back to being a 5-day week employer. But I think we'd lose people. I think we'd lose all those incentives. People. It's a cultural thing, isn't it? So people within our organisation know our culture is of very intensive, very productive work. While you're working, and so I don't expect it to go off, because I think we've embedded the culture within the organisation now.
I'm actually going to cheat and have one additional question. When moving for a 4-day week, how do you handle those staff on part-time contracts? Is there a pro rata system?
It was all, yes. Now that's quite technical, but yes, it was all done pro rata. But obviously there had to be some flexibility, because people on a 4-day week, they could then choose to, become a full-time employee or whatever. So it was about being flexible and taking every person as an individual and finding out what worked for them. Bank holidays were, interesting, but I know there is a solution. Please don't ask me for what it is, but I know we cracked the bank holiday issue. Lovely issue with the 4-day-a-week bin collection is that you don't have all that hoo-ha with bank holiday Mondays and having to, tell all your residents their bin's going to be collected on a different day of the week. But lots of councils do bin collections 4 days a week, so we already had the evidence out there that worked.
Fabulous. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And finally, I'll be joined by Professor Andy Westwood. So, 3 very different presentations, doing 3 very different things, but all with good evidence of kind of savings in day-to-day costs, often with some upfront investment. I wonder what your kind of reflections were on what you've heard.
Well, like you say, first thing to say is 3 fantastic examples and 3 very, very different examples of innovation in the different organisations and the different kind of policy environments in which you all operate. I think I think what I kind of heard, or the questions that it got me thinking about as I listened to them, you know, one, and all of these I think are obvious, but let me let me go through them anyway. The first is, where does the permission to innovate come from? Where in the institutions or where in the broader policy environment that surrounds you? Obviously, in the case study from South Cambridgeshire that we've just heard, you know, that permission was kind of consciously and deliberately taken away. But the sort of enabling environment, where does that come from? And where do we seek to kind of house autonomy in the system in order to do this kind of thinking and to carry out these kind of actions? The second is, it's one thing to want to do that, but where do you kind of incentivise and create capacity so that you can actually do it? You know, you all bring expertise and perspectives to the kind of trials, to the innovations you've described, but that just doesn't appear overnight. You know, you bring that expertise, that capacity has been developed over time, and there needs to be intention in the way that services are organised in order to create that kind of capacity and expertise. And the third is about sharing best practice and diffusion. I think that this may be unfair, but all three of the case studies kind of created that innovation from within. It's not as if you've brought it in from outside. But one of the big kind of public policy questions for government centrally is kind of, how do you diffuse that innovation, those kind of examples of best practice across the rest of the sector? It'd be quite interesting to have another version of this where we looked at kind of different local authorities copying what was going on in Dagenham or in Wakefield or in South Cambridgeshire to understand how they've kind of absorbed the lessons that each of you have kind of offered them, if you like. So those are kind of the three. And I have a burning other one. You know, in your introduction, that you talked about kind of this being a difficult budget and spending review. There's also quite a big question in that context about who banks the efficiencies. Is the assumption, as we know is the case, that kind of, you know, you will continue to create efficiencies in kind of the different organisations and sort of services that you run? But where do you kind of draw the line and create the balance so that institutions are doing more of this stuff and Treasury aren't just kind of pocketing all the benefits from the kind of innovations and best practices that you're creating? That's a kind of comment of the particular moment that we're in, but probably worth adding.
And looking ahead to the spending review and your comment on the enabling environment, what are the kind of key things that you think central government could do in the spending review to create a more enabling environment for the rest of the Parliament?
I think this is a probably, well, I mean, that's the toughest question of all, because the incentive is to bank the efficiencies. You know, this is a tough fiscal environment for kind of day-to-day public spending, and it doesn't look like that's going to change over the rest of the Parliament. So, if you like, all the incentives are kind of for central government to have their cake and eat it, to expect you to innovate and to take the kind of proceeds from it. However, you know, the real lesson is that you can take some of those proceeds, but you need to leave enough incentive and enough capacity in the institutions at local level so that more of this stuff happens, and so that kind of, you know, the outcome of particular services and processes continue to improve. And that, of course, is part of the political moment that we find ourselves in, as well as the sort of financial moment that we find ourselves in.
I'm going to open up to see if anyone wants to ask any questions. If not, I will take some online. So Ben Teal has asked, if the ideas for improved productivity are going to have to come from the local employee level, how can these ideas be fostered and distributed between local authorities in a cost-effective way?
Well, that's kind of a version of what we've just discussed, I think. Obviously, there are institutions at both kind of the representative level of local government, but also within national government, So there are institutions that kind of have this task of sharing best practice. Whether they're doing it well or well enough is a big issue. Whether central government and ministers, and again, we heard about your issues in South Cambridgeshire, whether ministers are empowering those institutions to do as much as they can. Clearly, in the last government, the answer to that would probably be no. But whether new ministers have kind of accepted that needs to change and how that needs to change is probably a work in progress and will depend quite a lot on kind of the financial settlements as well as the overall sort of policy framework. But, we hope.
To what extent do you think it is easier to make more radical changes in local government where there is potentially less media scrutiny in some cases? There's been a lot in the papers today on data sharing in the NHS, which there's been a strong pushback from some of Wes Streeting's proposals. I can only imagine some of the pushback that would come if the Treasury decides to go 4 days a week, for example. Are these types of changes easier to consider and implement locally?
I would hesitate to say yes, because I very much doubt it feels like you're kind of away from media or sort of public scrutiny, whether that's locally based scrutiny or nationally based scrutiny. Kind of doesn't feel like that matters that much. So I'll say no.
Excellent. It's good to have some disagreement on the stage. There's a hand up at the back, so we'll go to the gentleman there.
Thank you. Hugh Lloyd. An observation and a sort of question. The observation, back in the noughties, the NHS used to run things called the collaborative programmes, and that created hubs for deliberate learning sharing. And that could be something we should think about how this government might revive. The thing that struck me about all the examples was that the management and the leadership of those institutions was in the service of the work and in the service of the people doing the work. And it was all about helping give them the platform to do a really good job or a better job. That's one reason why the Treasury shouldn't take all the money, because they're not doing any of the work. But what do you think central government, Andy, could do to incentivise that sort of way of thinking? Leaders and managers are there to help this get done better. Thank you.
Over to you, Andy.
Yeah, well, that's a killer question, as I'd expect. I think there's a really important kind of philosophical kind of dimension to that, and I sort of touched on it a bit, I think, in the first issue, which is kind of where do you want autonomy to reside in the system? Is it on the front line? Is it in the kind of is it in the Treasury, or is it in the kind of department of X, or the sort of policy framework that they put together? And I think there is a huge tension, and we've seen this over 20 or 30 years, really, which is, can we prescribe models that we just want different public institutions to conform to? Here's the playbook. The more people that follow it, the kind of better standards will be across the board. Or do we encourage kind of more autonomy and innovation at the kind of front line? We've tended to do a lot more of the former than the latter, I think, over the last sort of 20 or 30 years. And, this is really a kind of, sort of new public management type approach. The formula-based, just get more people doing the kind of things that we think matter. We typically being at the centre of government rather than at the front line of it. It feels to me that more autonomy at the front line is a necessary ingredient to doing things better and to better outcomes at those local levels. I don't think kind of central government is there yet, but that is a particular issue we have in a very centralised system. How quickly we can move to that. I mean, the more of the kind of these case studies that we hear, and the more kind of we can evaluate their impact on the particular services that we've heard described today, the kind of more we can kind of build that case. But I think whether you're in children's services, whether you're in further education, whether you're in kind of public health, the importance of autonomy in those professions, I think, is critical.
Thank you. On that note, I'm going to bring this session to an end. As I mentioned at the start, this is our 4th in the series. The next one, which will focus on schools, is due to take place on the 28th of January, and details for that will be on our website in due course. Until then, I'd like to thank all of our speakers. Thanks to the Productivity Institute for partnering with us on this series, and thank you to all those who've attended in person, watched live, or are watching back later. Thank you very much.